Imagine for a moment that you are a student living 2,500 years ago. You want to get the best education in the world. You want to study medicine, law, or the art of war. Where do you go? You might think of Athens, walking the halls with Plato. Or maybe later, the Great Library of Alexandria. But centuries before those became the gold standard, there was another place. A place that was legendary in its own time, but has been almost completely erased from our collective memory. It was a city where Greek kings ruled over Indian subjects. A city where you could hear Sanskrit, Greek, and Aramaic spoken in the same marketplace. It was a metropolis described by travelers as being as large and magnificent as Nineveh. This is Taxila. Located in modern-day Pakistan, Taxila was once the intellectual capital of Asia. It was a city of scholars, a city of trade, and a city of peace. But today, if you go there, you will find only dust and ruins. How did a city this important simply vanish? How did it survive invasions by Alexander the Great and the Persians, only to be wiped off the map by a mysterious force from the north? And why did it take a 19th century British detective to find it again? Today, we are uncovering the story of the world's forgotten university city. To understand why Taxila was so important, you have to understand real estate. And in the ancient world, Taxila had the best location on the map. The city sat exactly at the convergence of three major trade routes. To the north and west, you had the routes coming from Central Asia and Kashmir. To the east, the road led straight to the mighty Ganges Valley of India. Historians called this the Royal Highway. Because of this, Taxila wasn't just a city, it was a funnel. Every merchant bringing silk from China, every trader bringing spices from India, and every caravan carrying gold from the west had to pass through here. Wealth poured into the city. But unlike other trading hubs that spent their money on armies or monuments, Taxila spent it on mines. It became a university town. The ancient texts, including the Hindu epics, the Ramayana, and the Mahabharata, speak of Taxila with reverence. The Mahabharata was supposedly first recited here. Students traveled thousands of miles to learn from the masters who lived here. One of the most famous residents was a man named Chanakya. If you don't know him, think of him as the Machiavelli of India, but centuries earlier. He was a professor at Taxila who went on to engineer the rise of the massive Mauryan Empire. This wasn't just a dusty outpost, this was the place where kingmakers were made. The city grew so old and complex that it wasn't just built in one go. The archaeological record shows us that the city actually shifted locations over time. The earliest settlement, known as the Pier Mound, was a chaotic, organic city with winding streets. It was bustling, crowded, and rich. But then, the neighbors came knocking. In 326 BCE, a new force arrived on the horizon, Alexander the Great. Usually when Alexander showed up, cities burned. But Taxila was different. The ruler of Taxila, King Ambi, was a pragmatist. Instead of fighting a hopeless war, he surrendered and even allied with Alexander to help him fight a rival king, Porus. Because of this smart diplomacy, Taxila survived, and this began one of the most fascinating periods in human history, the Hellenistic era of Asia. After Alexander died, his generals and their descendants carved up his empire. A Greek king named Demetrius the Mathur invaded the region in 184 BCE. But instead of just ruling over the old chaotic city, he decided to build a new one right next door. This was the second Taxila, known today as Sirkap, and it looked completely different. If you walked through Sirkap, you wouldn't feel like you were in India. You would feel like you were in Greece. Demetrius built the city on a grid system, neat, orderly, with defined streets and stone fortifications. It was a perfect fusion of East and West. Imagine walking down the main street of Sirkap 2,000 years ago. You would see a Buddhist stupa decorated with the double-headed eagle, a symbol often associated with empires to the west. You would see temples that looked like Greek shrines standing next to Jain sanctuaries. The population was a melting pot. Greeks, Iranians, and Indians lived side by side. It was here that the artistic style known as Gandhara art flourished. This is where we see the first statues of the Buddha given human form. often wearing Greek-style togas and with the wavy hair of a Greek god like Apollo. A Greek philosopher named Apollonius of Tyana visited Taxila in the 1st century CE. He wrote that the city was as large as Nineveh, the ancient Assyrian capital, and praised its layout and its people. It seemed like Taxila would last forever. It had survived the Persians, the Macedonians, the Greeks, and the Parthians. It adapted, it absorbed cultures, it grew stronger, but in the 5th century, a new enemy appeared. And they were not interested in trade or philosophy. They were called the Hephthalites, or the White Huns. Coming from the steppes of Central Asia, the Huns were a destructive force that swept through the region like a wildfire. When they reached Taxila around 460-470 CE, the Age of Tolerance ended. The Huns didn't just conquer, they obliterated. The archaeological evidence tells a grim story. The stately Buddhist monasteries, which had stood for centuries as centers of peace and learning, were heavily damaged. The double-headed eagle stupa, the Greek temples, the university halls, all were targeted. The destruction was so complete that the population simply gave up. They fled. The cost of the war was so high that the city couldn't recover. The trade routes, which had been the lifeblood of the city, shifted. Merchants, fearing the instability and violence of the Huns, found other ways to move their goods. Taxila, once the hub of the wheel, was suddenly in the middle of nowhere. By the mid-7th century, when the famous Chinese monk Huan Song visited the site, hoping to see the legendary center of Buddhism, he found a ghost town. He described it in his journals with one heartbreaking word: desolate. The libraries were gone. The students were gone. The city of cut stone had become a city of silence. For over 1,000 years, Taxila was lost. It became a mound of dirt, its true location debated by scholars who only knew it from ancient texts. It wasn't until the 19th century that the city was found again. Sir Alexander Cunningham, a British engineer and archaeologist, began piecing together the clues. He realized that the ancient maps and distances recorded by Greek and Chinese travelers had been misinterpreted. In 1863, he stuck a spade in the ground and confirmed this was the lost capital. Later excavations by Sir John Marshall in the early 20th century peeled back the layers of history, revealing the 3 distinct cities of Taxila: the organic Indian city, the orderly Greek city, and the heavy-walled Kushan city. Today, Taxila is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it stands as a fragile reminder of a time when globalization wasn't a modern concept. It was a place where a student could read the Vedas in the morning and discuss Greek philosophy in the afternoon. It reminds us that civilization is fragile. Even the greatest centers of learning, places that seem too big and too important to fail, can be turned to dust if the world turns against them. So, the next time you hear about the great universities of history, remember Taxila, the ancient city that taught the world before the world forgot it. If you liked this journey into the lost cities of the Silk Road, make sure to like and subscribe. We delve into the past to understand our present every week. Thanks for watching.